Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number 1, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. What a season it's been for JSN. Pretty much every game, 8 to 9 catches, 100 yards he's getting for the Seattle Seahawks team. And this week in a matchup versus an improved Arizona defense over the last few weeks, I still think JSN goes out there and has another 100-yard game. Number 2, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. And Nacua, once again, he got banged up in the Week 9 victory versus New Orleans Saints with a chest injury. But as of now, Sean McVay, he's confident Nacua could give it a go this week at the 49ers. So Nacua, he's a matchup problem. A lot of bubble screens, a lot of quick passes he catches and makes plays. And he's already one of the best wide receivers in the league in his third year in the NFL. Number 3, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So last week he had a good game, St. Brown. He left some points out there with St. Brown with a couple drops and 2 balls he usually catches, including dropping a touchdown as well. So this week, great matchup at the Commanders. Their defense the last few weeks hasn't stopped anyone. And now with Marshawn Lattimore, one of the better corners on Washington out for the season with a torn ACL, I think St. Brown, he could have a big game this week. Number 4, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. Last week was a big game for Drake London. Obviously, 3 touchdowns in that one. And him and Penix are definitely building up a rapport. So this week in a matchup versus Indianapolis, that obviously just traded for Sauce Gardner. We'll see if Gardner is going to be available for Sunday's ball game overseas. But anyway, Drake London, he's been a matchup-proof receiver most of the season. The problems where he's had off games was just not getting targeted and Penix holding on to the football too long. But this week versus Indianapolis, even if Gardner's on him in this one, I still think he could go out there and have a good game. Number 5, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Justin Jefferson, it's been an up-and-down season. He's still putting up decent ball games as Jefferson, but we still haven't seen that 25, 30-point game out of Justin Jefferson. So this week versus the Ravens, their defense has improved over the last few weeks here, but still a defense that gives up yards, gives up points. And I think Jefferson this week, after having a good week with McCarthy last week, could go out there and have a decent ball game. Number 6, Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So obviously Mike Evans out with the collarbone injury, possibly the remainder of the regular season. Egbuka is going to step in as the number 1 wideout. Chris Godwin, he hasn't been healthy pretty much the whole season, even if he returns in this game. And Egbuka already taken the league by storm. Chris Route running, good yard after catch guy, and him and Baker Mayfield have been locked in this season. And now healed up from that hamstring injury. I think he could get back to putting up elite numbers, even though it is a tougher matchup versus the Patriots. Number 7, Davante Adams of the Los Angeles Rams. So Adams and Puka Nacua, one of the best, if not the best 1-2 combo receiving room in all pro football. So this week, a good matchup at the depleted San Francisco 49er defense. Obviously, and Fred Warner out for the season. This defense is taking a big hit, and Adams, we know he's a good route runner, still got a good touchdown prowess, 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games for Adams. And this week at the Niners, I think you'll find the end zone once again. Number 8, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So the New York Jets, they had a fire sale at the deadline, trading Quinnen Williams, trading Sauce Gardner, and they did bring in Adonai Mitchell. They'll see what they got in him. But this week in a matchup with the Browns coming in, Denzel Ward, most likely he's going to be on Garrett Wilson. But Garrett Wilson, we've seen throughout his career, played with a lot of bad quarterbacks, and he's still been going out there and putting up numbers. Number 9, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Pittman, what a resurgence here it's been for him. And obviously this whole Colt team with Daniel Jones in their quarterback. So Pittman, he could run the routes, he could make plays. Last week it was a down game for the offense, but Pittman still had a good fantasy day. And this week versus a Falcons secondary that is middle of the pack at best, I think Pittman goes out there and has a good game again. Number 10, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So Nico Collins, last week it was a decent game for him coming back from concussion. To me, it looks like Davis Mills most likely would be the starter this week. Jacksonville defense that just got torched by the Raiders offense, which is one of the worst offenses in the league. I think Nico Collins will get his numbers in this one. Number 11, Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. Last week, Odunze, it was a goose egg for him, 3 targets, and it's hard to believe they scored 47 points in that game was the Chicago Bears. But Odunze all season long pretty much been consistent, still the number 1 option in the passing game, I say, for the Chicago Bear team. And this week in a good matchup versus the Giants, he'll bounce back. Number 12, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So there were some rumblings, possibly A.J. Brown will get dealt at the NFL trade deadline, but obviously that didn't come to fruition. So this week in a matchup at the Packers, where their defense obviously has been one of the better units in the league, I still think A.J. Brown's going to get things going. Him and Jalen Hurts, I know they're not the best of friends and they don't see eye to eye at times, but when it's time to go and have a big game versus a good team, they usually go out there and deliver. Number 13, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers, his numbers have been mediocre over the last few weeks, even though he's a consistent back-end 2-3 receiver for fantasy owners. So this week, a middle-of-the-pack matchup in Minnesota. Last week, we saw St. Brown have a good game versus defense and Sam Laporte, and I think Zay Flowers is the number one option in this passing game for Baltimore. Could have a good game this week. 14, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So Waddle easily the number one option in the passing game with Tyreek Hill, who's been out for a few weeks and obviously out for the season. This week, a matchup versus Buffalo where they're going to be chasing points early and often in this Miami Dolphin team. And Waddle on volume alone will just work into production. 15, Lab McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Lab McConkey to me is the number one option in this passing game. Keenan Allen snaps and targets have gone down, and Quentin Johnson, his numbers have gone down as well over the last month. So this week, not a great matchup versus Pittsburgh, where obviously you got Jalen Ramsey, one of the better corners in the league, and Darius Slay, a solid corner as well, but still McConkey, he's going out there more weeks than not and at least hitting double-digit fantasy points. 16, Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Cortland Sutton, his numbers have taken a hit a little bit, but at least 3 weeks in a row with not much production and not a lot of targets, still double-digit fantasy games. So this week, a slam dunk matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Sutton and Bo Nix, going back to last season and Nix's rookie year. So this week versus Vegas, if it's any time for him to break out and have a big game, it will be this week. 17, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. Jacoby Brissett's going to remain the starter, which is good news, in my opinion, for Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. And this week, it's a matchup at Seattle where they're good defense. Tyreek Woolen, one of the better corners in the league, most likely will be shadowing Marvin Harrison. But last week was a breakout game for Marvin. 7 catches, 96 yards, and found the end zone. I know it was versus a bad Dallas Cowboy defense, but I think Marvin this week at Seattle could go out there, and like I said, it'll be more consistent with Brissett in their quarterback. 18, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Smith in this offense had turned things around the last 2 games in Minnesota in Week 7, and then Week 8 blew the doors off versus the New York Giants. So this week, I know it's a tougher matchup at one of the better defenses in the league at the Green Bay Packers, but Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts back on the same page. Still one of the better deep ball threats in all the NFL. And I think this week at Green Bay, he's a top 20 option. 19, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave, as the weeks were going on, it was unlikely he was going to get traded, but his teammate Rashid Shaheed, who's in the rumor mill a lot, did get traded to the Seahawks. And now more targets are going to come Chris Olave's way. I don't see anyone really stepping up, becoming the number 2 receiver and taking targets over there in New Orleans. Maybe Brandon Cooks will step up, or Devon Vele, but still Chris Olave is going to get peppered with targets, and this week it's a pretty solid matchup at the Panthers. 20, Deebo Samuel with the Washington Commanders. So once again, Terry McLaurin, he's going to be out most likely in this game. Luke McCaffrey broke his collarbone, he's going to be out. And Deebo, we know he's getting a lot of spam routes and short yardage PPR receptions. So this week in a matchup versus Detroit where they're going to be chasing points, Deebo Samuel going to be the number 1 target for Marcus Mariota once again. 21, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Metcalf last week, it was a down game, obviously. The Steelers did win that game, but it was a lot with the running game, and Pat Freiermuth found the end zone in that one. But this week at the Chargers, I don't see Metcalf going out there and having a bad game once again. And I've said this a lot in my videos, that Aaron Rodgers usually is number 1 option in on his team, is going to go out there and put points on the board and be a good fantasy option more weeks than not. 22, Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. With Tucker Kraft out for the season and Matthew Golden banged up, Romeo Doubs even more targets. I think he's going to work his way into. I know Christian Watson, he's been back from injury, but he's more of a deep ball threat, and he's an injury-prone wide receiver anyway for this Packer team. So Romeo Doubs, like I said, easily the number 1 option now in this passing game. Golden's had a down rookie season, and this week versus Philadelphia, I know with great corners, especially adding Jair Alexander as well to this roster, I think Doubs still, on volume alone, could be a top 24 option. 23, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. So Addison, he's been solid once again this season. And when you got single coverage where obviously a lot of defense rolls to Justin Jefferson, you're going to get open and make plays. And him and J.J. McCarthy got to work on rapport a little bit. They didn't really have a training camp where Addison was suspended the first 3 weeks of the season. But this week versus Baltimore, in a game where they could be chasing points, I think points could be there for Addison this week. 24, Tator McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. Tator McMillan, I think it's been a solid rookie season, and he's another guy where he's pretty much the only option in that passing game. Xavier Legette, he hasn't done anything pretty much all season long. Jalen Colker, he was injured the majority of the season. He hasn't done much. in the games he's been back. And this week in a matchup versus New Orleans, a defense that really can't stop anyone, I think when McMillan bounces back after a down game last week, 25, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it's been a down year, no doubt about it, for Brian Thomas Jr. Now he's banged up with a low ankle sprain, even though he's going to try to gut it out and play in this week's ball game at the Houston Texans. And also we know they did trade for Jacoby Myers, and that Travis Hunter's injury might not be long-term, where he might only miss the 3 more games while he's on IR. But Brian Thomas, to me, he's still a wide receiver that could go out there and make plays. I know drops have been an issue, and obviously scared to cross the middle at times. But him and Trevor Lawrence have the rapport from last season before Lawrence went down. And I think Brian Thomas, as long as he's on that field, he's still going to get peppered with targets, even when Myers over there make plays. 26, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. So this week, a good matchup in Miami, a defense that can't stop anyone. Is this Miami defense? Shakir or Dalton Kincaid are the top 2 options in this offense in the passing game for this Buffalo Bill team. So Shakir, he has good hands, a good yard after catch guy underneath the route runner. And this week in Miami, like I said, their defense can't stop anyone. And we saw last week Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers have good games versus defense. 27, Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. So like I said early in the video, his routes have gone down, participation, receptions and targets have gone down. Last week he had a good game though, 4 catches, 53 yards, found the end zone. And I think Keenan Allen's the guy who's taking the biggest hit in this offense, with Rondé Gatson emerging over the last few weeks here. So this week in a matchup versus a good Pittsburgh defense, I still think Quentin Johnston could go out there and give you wide receiver 3 numbers. 28, Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots. So Stephon Diggs, the last few weeks, he's been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver, where not a lot of yards, not a lot of receptions. And Drake May's that type of quarterback where he's going to spread the football out and spread it to 8 or 9 different pass catchers in the offense. So this week at Tampa Bay, I expect this to be a high-scoring game. Tampa Bay, a high-powered offense. In New England, they're putting points on the board. So I think Stephon Diggs this week, he's another guy. If he's not scoring a touchdown, though, his upside's not high. But let's see this week if he could get yards and catches together. 29, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So more the last 2 weeks he's gone out there, he's putting up numbers. Even last week he threw a touchdown in that shootout at the Cincinnati Bengals. And this week another good matchup versus the New York Giants, a defense that can't stop anyone. But like I said, Rome Odunze, he didn't catch any passes last week. That's not going to happen once again, I believe, for this Bear team. And that running game, if it's going to be DeAndre Swift coming back or Kyle Monunga, who had a monster game, 176 yards on the ground last week, I still think DJ Moore's ceiling isn't that high, and with the emergence of Colston Loveland as well, so a lot of mouths to feed over there in Chicago. 30, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. So Wan'Dale Robinson last week does what he does best underneath route runner. He's going to spam catches in PPR leagues where he could get easy 8 or 9 catches is Wan'Dale Robinson, but only get 50, 60 yards, which has been a stat line we've seen from him a few times throughout his career. So this week at Chicago, a high-powered offense Chicago is, they're going to have to be chasing points, is this New York Giant team. And I think he's another guy that could work in to wide receiver 3 numbers. 31, Parker Washington of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if Brian Thomas can't give it a go, then Parker Washington bumps up, obviously, on the list. Last week was a good ball game for Parker Washington, and believe it or not, he's been the most consistent wide receiver, I believe, this season for this Jacksonville Jaguar team, where Travis Hunter had a couple good games, and a couple games he didn't do much. And Brian Thomas, for the most part, hasn't done much this season. 32, Juwan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. So Ricky Pearsall, still no timetable really for his return. Brandon Ayuk, they didn't open the practice window for him. And pretty much it's Juwan Jennings and Kendrick Bourne, the only 2 wide receivers healthy and who actually go out there and make plays. So this week with the Rams coming in, a team that puts up a lot of points, and San Francisco is going to chase points. Juwan Jennings, I think, could go out there and be a decent option, and he did find the end zone last week at the New York Giants. 33, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So J-Mo last week found the end zone, and then trying to get him more involved once again in this Lion offense. And J-Mo last season had a big season, and this year's been a down year. But this week, a good matchup with the Commanders. Their defense hasn't stopped anyone over the last few weeks. And Williams, he could be that deep ball threat, and also a guy who could take a slant to the end zone for monster yards. 34, Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. So the last few weeks, Franklin's got an expanded role in this offense. Marvin Mims hasn't been a factor. Evan Ingram, he hasn't done much in the passing game. So Franklin right now the number 2 option in the passing game behind Cortland Sutton. And we've even seen Franklin outplay Sutton in the last couple weeks, including in Week 8. He had a big game, 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. So this week in a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders on the Thursday night game where the Raiders can't stop anyone and it's usually high-scoring games. I think Franklin goes out there and is a good game. 35 Alec Pierce to the Indianapolis Colts. So this season, Pierce, he's gotten better. He's not just a deep ball threat. And obviously this offense as a whole is way better with Daniel Jones in there. Compared to Anthony Richardson, who we beat out in training camp. So this week a good matchup with Atlanta coming in, overseas game. They're usually high-scoring games as well. And Alec Pierce, like I said, he's doing a little bit of everything. Last week went over 100 yards. I know some of it was garbage time, but fantasy points are fantasy points. And the 36th and final receiver I'm ranking Tez Johnson, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's been a nice deep ball threat, an intermediate route guy over the last few weeks is Tez Johnson. With the injury to Mike Evans, obviously, he's most likely out for the regular season with the collarbone injury. Chris Godwin, even if he returns, he's not going to be 100%, where he had a bad leg injury last season and tried gutting it out, but he's missed multiple weeks. And this week, we know this could be a potential high-scoring game with the Patriots coming into Tampa Bay. So Baker and Johnson, they're on the same page. And Johnson's had double-digit fantasy points the last 3 games in a row, so that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for Week 10 of the fantasy football season.